Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling a topic that's pretty much guaranteed to pop up on the IELTS speaking test, the environment.
It's one of those topics well, it's everywhere, right? You can't really escape it these days.
True. And for those of you prepping for the IELTS, it's not just about knowing the facts.
Right, you've got to be able to talk about them fluently, using the right vocabulary.
Exactly. And that's where this deep dive comes in. We've got some awesome source material that's packed with typical IELTS questions about the environment. And get this, they even have model answers.
Which are super helpful, but of course the goal isn't to just memorize those answers word for word.
No way. We're going to use them as a starting point, a blueprint, you could say.
Yeah, like a framework to help you structure your own answers.
Yeah.
But you'll need to personalize them.
Add your own spin, your own examples. Make them your own.
Because that's what the examiners are looking for. They want to see that you can think critically, and that you can connect the dots.
All right, let's jump right in. First up, the big one. Climate change. Oh boy. One of our sources asks this: what are the main causes of global warming? It's something we hear about all the time, but can you break it down for us?
Of course. I mean, the source material really hits the nail on the head, highlighting human activities as the primary drivers. Things like deforestation,
All right, cutting down all those trees.
Exactly. And industrial emissions, all those factories pumping out who knows what.
And then there's burning fossil fuels, like for our cars and power plants.
Yep. All of that contributes to the problem, and what they all have in common is that they release greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases. No, those are definitely some key terms to remember for the IELTS, right?
Absolutely. They're essential. And those greenhouse gases, they trap heat in the atmosphere.
Creating a kind of blanket around the Earth.
Right. And that leads to, it leads to that gradual warming, that rise in global temperatures.
Okay, so we've got deforestation, industrial emissions, fossil fuels, and greenhouse gases. Lots to remember there, but think about how you could use those terms in your own answers.
That's the key.
Like if you were asked about individual actions to combat climate change.
That's a good one.
You could talk about how choosing to walk or bike instead of driving reduces our reliance on those pesky fossil fuels.
Right, and even though it might feel like a small step, it all adds up.
Like they say, every little bit helps.
It's a drop in the ocean, but those drops can become a huge wave of change.
I love that. And speaking of drops in the ocean, did you know that deforestation alone accounts for a huge chunk of global greenhouse gas emissions?
Oh, yeah, it's a significant contributor.
I mean, it's like 10%, right?
You got it. About 10%.
Wow. I had no idea it was that much.
It's massive. Roughly the same as all the emissions from every single car on the planet combined.
Whoa. That's a powerful image. So, yeah, individual actions are important, but we also need to tackle these larger, systemic issues.
Absolutely. And the examiners will be looking for that kind of awareness, that you understand the complexity of the problem.
Okay, let's move on. From climate change, we're going to zoom out a bit to talk about the broader issue of pollution and its effects. Another question from our source material asks, how would you explain the effects of pollution on health and the environment?
Oh, yeah. This is where things get a little bit, heavier.
It's not exactly lighthearted, is it?
No, not really. The source material doesn't sugarcoat it either.
Well, let's hear it. What does it say?
It states that pollution, it has far-reaching consequences. Air pollution, for example, leads to respiratory issues.
Right, like breathing problems.
And it can also cause cardiovascular diseases.
Heart problems.
Yep. And then you've got water pollution, which can contaminate drinking water.
Making it unsafe.
Exactly. And it can even endanger marine life.
Oh, right. All those poor fish and other creatures in the ocean.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. Contaminate, endanger, respiratory issues. Those are some powerful words. And they're exactly the kind of advanced vocabulary that the examiners love to hear.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just about using big words, is it? It's about using them effectively.
Right. You have to show that you understand what they mean and how to use them in context.
Like if you were explaining contaminant, you could say something like, when microplastics get into the ocean and then end up in the fish we eat, that's contamination in action, and it's a serious threat to our health.
Wow, that's a great example. It makes it so much more real and relatable. It's not just some abstract term. It's something that directly impacts our lives.
And it shows you can connect the dots between different environmental issues, which is a big plus.
Okay, so we've talked about climate change, we've talked about pollution. Now it's time for something a little more uplifting.
Oh, good.
Our sources also talk about solutions, specifically the role of renewable energy resources. One question asks, what role do renewable energy resources play in combating climate change?
That's a great question. And the source highlights renewables like solar, wind, and hydropower as key players in reducing those greenhouse gas emissions we were talking about earlier.
Right, because unlike fossil fuels, these renewable sources produce energy without all that pollution.
Exactly, making them a sustainable solution to our energy needs.
Sustainable solution, I love that phrase. But what makes them sustainable? I mean, it seems like such a buzzword these days, but in this case, it really means something, right?
You're absolutely right. It's not just a buzzword here. It's about a fundamental shift in how we produce and consume energy.
How so?
Well, renewables are sustainable because they're constantly being replenished by nature. Think about it. The sun keeps shining.
We can always count on the sun.
The wind keeps blowing. The water cycle keeps flowing. They're not finite resources like fossil fuels, which we're constantly extracting and depleting.
Right, they're not going to run out on us.
Exactly. And on the IELTS, you could even tie this into sustainable travel. Talk about the benefits of choosing a train over a plane, for example.
Reducing our impact on the environment.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of impact, our source material mentions carbon footprint as well. Can you explain what that means?
Of course. Your carbon footprint refers to the total amount of greenhouse gases emitted by, it could be an individual, an organization, or even a product. It's basically a way to quantify our impact on the environment.
So it's like a measurement of how much we're contributing to the problem.
You got it. And reducing our carbon footprint is essential for tackling climate change.
I think it all comes back to that, doesn't it?
It does. And it's something you could definitely be asked about on the IELTS.
So it's good to have some examples in mind, like, did you know that flying generates a lot of emissions?
Oh, yeah. It's a big contributor to our carbon footprint.
I never really thought about that before.
It's something to be mindful of. And on the IELTS, you could talk about alternatives, like choosing to travel by train or even opting for a staycation.
Staycations are always fun.
Right. And they're more sustainable.
So it's all about making conscious choices, I guess.
It is. And being aware of the long-term consequences of our actions.
Well, this is definitely giving me a lot to think about.
It's all connected, isn't it?
I'm starting to see how this deep dive will help me not only on the IELTS, but also in my everyday life.
That's great to hear. And that's really the goal, isn't it? To give you the knowledge and skills to navigate these issues, both in the test setting and in the real world.
I'm feeling a lot more confident already. Thanks for breaking all of this down for me.
Mm-hmm.
What else do our sources have in store for us?
Well, we're moving on to something you encounter every single day. Recycling and waste management. I mean, think about it. You deal with trash, right? Every day.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I remember when I first started actually paying attention to recycling, all those symbols on the bins, they were like a foreign language to me.
It can be a bit overwhelming at first, right?
Yeah, totally. Like what goes where?
But once you get the hang of it, it becomes pretty much second nature. Oh, yeah.
Hopefully.
The source material it really emphasizes how crucial recycling is for reducing waste. In those massive landfills.
Oh, yeah. Landfills. Not exactly a pretty sight.
No, not at all. And recycling helps us conserve natural resources, too.
So we're not just burying all this stuff in the ground. We're actually trying to reuse it.
Exactly, by reusing materials like paper, glass, plastic, all of that.
Right. We can lower pollution levels.
And minimize our overall environmental impact.
Okay, I'm seeing landfills, conserve, and minimize as key terms here.
Yeah, those are important ones.
Any tips for actually remembering them? Sometimes all the vocab can get a bit jumbled in my head.
Well, visualizing things can be really helpful.
Oh, okay.
Like picture a landfill. Right?
A mountain of garbage.
A mountain of trash stretching as far as the eye can see.
Yuck.
Then imagine all the resources that went into making those products. The trees cut down for paper, the energy used for manufacturing plastic.
Right. It's easy to forget about all of that.
And conserve means using those resources wisely, right?
So we don't just keep creating more and more trash.
Exactly. And then minimize, that's about shrinking that mountain of trash down, making it as small as possible.
Okay, that makes sense. Less trash mountain, more happy planet. So much easier to remember when you put it like that.
Visualizing things can really make a difference.
It can.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, even with the best intentions, I've definitely had my share of recycling mishaps.
Oh, tell me about it.
I remember that time I threw a plastic bag in with the with the recyclable plastics.
You think it was fine?
Yeah, I was like, plastic, no problem. But it turned out my local recycling facility, they didn't accept them.
Oh, right.
It happens.
So yeah, I contaminated the whole batch.
It happens to the best of us. And it's a great example for the IELTS, actually.
Yeah, because it highlights, the importance of understanding your local recycling guidelines. They can vary from place to place, so it's really important to do your research.
I learned that the hard way.
You could even share that anecdote on the IELTS speaking test.
Oh, you think?
Definitely. It shows that you're actively trying to improve your habits and that you understand the nuances of recycling.
It's not always as straightforward as it seems, right?
Right. And it brings up that phrasal verb, sort out, which our source mentions.
Oh, yes, sort out.
It perfectly captures that process of, separating recyclables from general waste.
Right, making sure everything ends up in the right bin.
Exactly. And it reminds me of another idiom, actually. Old habits die hard.
Ooh, I like that one.
It can be tough to break free from those ingrained behaviors, even when we know they're not good for the planet.
That's so true. Like, I still find myself reaching for a plastic bag at the grocery store sometimes, even though I have like a million reusable bags at home.
We've all been there. It takes time and effort to change those habits.
It does.
So think about your own habits,
Okay.
Are there areas where you could improve? Maybe you could start composting food scraps.
Composting. I've always wanted to try that, but I've never really known where to start.
It's a great way to reduce your environmental impact. And you end up with nutrient-rich soil for your garden.
That's a bonus.
It is. And swapping out those disposable containers for reusable ones.
Oh, yeah, like those plastic Tupperware containers.
Exactly. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference over time.
You're right. It's all about taking those small steps.
It is. And building momentum.
And hopefully inspiring others to do the same.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of sustainability where these actions, where they become the norm.
Instead of the exception.
Right. And that ties back to, the bigger picture of tackling environmental challenges. What stands out to you from our deep dive so far? Anything that's really resonating with you?
I think what's really amazing to me is how interconnected everything is.
That's interesting.
Like we started with climate change, right? Then we kind of zoomed out to pollution, and now we're talking about recycling and individual actions. It's like a giant web.
Yes.
And each thread, it affects all the others.
You're absolutely right. And that's the kind of interconnected thinking that you want to demonstrate on the IELTS speaking test.
Okay, so connect the dots.
Yes. Show the examiners that you see the big picture, that you understand the complexities and that you can connect those seemingly disparate issues.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I can actually do this.
Yeah.
Like this IELTS thing might not be so scary after all.
That's great to hear. You're doing great.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more question from our source material that I want to touch on. It asks about the benefits of renewable energy resources, but it goes beyond just combating climate change. It's like, what are some of those additional benefits,
That's a great question, and it shows you're thinking critically about the topic.
Oh, good.
One key benefit is energy security.
Energy security.
Relying so heavily on fossil fuels makes countries vulnerable, right?
Vulnerable to what?
To price fluctuations.
Oh, right, like when oil prices go up and down.
Exactly. And also geopolitical instability. So by diversifying our energy sources, and embracing those renewables,
we become less reliant on those volatile global markets.
Exactly. It gives countries more control over their energy production, and it reduces that dependence on imports.
Makes sense.
And it can also create new jobs.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And stimulate economic growth in the renewable energy sector.
So it's not just about saving the planet. It's about creating a more stable and prosperous future as well.
Precisely. It's about understanding that multifaceted nature of these issues.
Right, seeing how everything is connected.
The environmental, the economic, and the social factors.
Wow, this deep dive is really opening my eyes to all the different dimensions of this environment topic. I feel like I can actually handle those IELTS questions now. We've covered so much, from those causes of climate change all the way to those solutions like renewable energy and recycling. It's amazing how much we've unpacked.
And it's not about, remember, it's not about memorizing every single fact or figure. It's more about showing that, well, showing that you understand how complex these issues are and that you can explain your thoughts clearly, right? And how to connect all the different aspects of the topic.
You've given me so many great strategies and examples. I especially love that idea of, using personal stories to illustrate those more complex vocabulary words. I mean, it makes the whole thing so much more relatable, right? And engaging.
Absolutely. Like sharing a story about that time you accidentally, well, contaminated your recycling. It can actually be a really effective way to show your understanding of a concept. It shows you're not just, repeating information, but that you're actually thinking about it, critically,
Yeah.
and how it applies to your own life.
And all those idioms, the ones we've sprinkled throughout this whole conversation, I mean, those are going to be like my secret weapons for the speaking test. Like a drop in the ocean, the tip of the iceberg, and old habits die hard.
Yeah.
They add so much more, I don't know, color and depth to my answers.
They really do. They show that you've mastered the language. And a cultural awareness that the examiners, they really appreciate that. And it's not just about using them correctly, right?
Right.
It's about weaving them into your responses naturally so that they sound natural and enhance your message.
Okay. I'm making a note to practice using those idioms, in different contexts. Now, before we wrap up this whole thing, I want to touch on one more thing, something that's been, swirling around in my mind throughout this deep dive. We talked a lot about those individual actions, right? But what about those bigger systemic changes that need to happen? Like how can we address those on the IELTS?
You bring up a really excellent point there. You might get asked about the role of governments and corporations in tackling these environmental challenges. This is really where you can showcase your critical thinking skills.
So like I could talk about policies to promote renewable energy. And regulations to curb pollution, or even those initiatives to encourage sustainable consumption.
Exactly. You could discuss the pros and cons of different approaches, highlight successful examples from around the world, and even offer your own perspective on what needs to change.
I'm realizing that the IELTS isn't just a test. It's more like an opportunity to really engage with these important issues and to express my own views.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? It's a chance to show off your knowledge, and your critical thinking skills and your passion for creating a better world.
I'm feeling pretty inspired right now. I'm ready to hit the books and practice those speaking prompts. But before we go, is there any final piece of advice you'd like to share?
Remember that the future of our planet, it depends on informed and engaged citizens like you. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep using your voice to advocate for positive change.
That's a powerful reminder. It's not just about passing a test. It's about being part of the solution.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of environmental issues and, of course, the IELTS speaking test.
It's been a really incredible journey. And to all of our listeners out there, remember, you're not alone in this. We're all in this together. And every step we take towards a more sustainable future, it counts. So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep making a difference.